so we start the 1937 turn. Everybody gets flags now, including the U.S. Pretty impressive. Getting rid of status quo is a big deal for the Allies. And the Russians did that for them. That's wonderful. The Russians have a problem, though. They don't get a free flag. You can see their stability is down to wavering. They would really like a flag. They're not particularly good at gaining them, though. They might end up hurting their stability to gain a flag, and that would kind of suck. Well, so they make a stability check. That's 3 dice. Yeah, we're going to take a flag, and we'll take that check. Because we need the flag to raise our stability with propaganda. 5, stability checks are not the things that we're penalized on. We're penalized on political actions. So that's kind of cool. I'm going to try to step away a little bit more. Turns are going to start getting longer and longer, and I would like to keep each video to each turn to one video as much as possible. I don't know how much we can abstract away, though. So, for example, here, I'm going to do the production and all that. Kind of offhand. I don't think I have to detail too much about that. And I may step away during periods where we're just drawing things and come back and give reports as to what happened. As I do in most games. It just feels funny here. Because it is very procedural and very kind of random because of the chip pull and everything. Let's briefly go over the builds. The French building a plane. Italians and infantry, both of them very, very low production. Why do the French only have 1 plane? They had 2 production points. They didn't have to spend 2 for it. Yeah, I can't come up with a reason why they won't build an infantry to go with it. The Italians had only 1 production point, though, and that hurts them. So they built their 1 thing. Maybe I forgot to give the French their production, and they only had their 1 point left over, and I think that's what it was. So they should have had 2 additional, because I had 1 on the chart from before. That brings us to the U.S. and the Brits. The Brits built all their counters. The U.S. have already built all their counters, so they have a whole shitload of offensive markers. What does that do for them? Yeah, that's a good question. Those are useless as long as I'm in civilian production. I have to get them up to reorganization to do something valuable with them. Because they convert 2 for 1 into military operations, military actions. I can't even place economic support aid into, if I understand things correctly, I can't even give aid to the Chinese, which means, of course, the advantage of giving aid to the Chinese is that I start to accumulate more flags. But let me make sure that I understand that properly. Yeah, I don't know. It's not an operation, it's a military action. So intervention is an action. I would have to have 2 of those tokens available at once. So I'm throwing 1 in to give me builds for later. Those others are passes for now. Presumably, if I can get up to rearmament, I can use some of that big pool of crap to help the Chinese. I can trace for the Philippines. The Russians expended their Polish limited resource and bought themselves some more military. They've got a lot of military to build right now. Boy, do they have a lot. Maybe too much. The Japanese, not a lot of production. They bought their carrier upgrade again. Make sure their Navy's in good shape. In case the U.S. comes in, they'll be built up and ready to take advantage of it. Again, the Air Force expansions that I can do are not as valuable. I also, instead of building an Air Force expansion or my logistics unit, and the logistics unit isn't a terrible idea, but I'm keeping 2 offensives so that I can continue expanding into China, get my victory points, get my stuff. And what else? I don't know what else. Germany. Lots of ground and air power. We're worried Russia's just going to come crushing into us. Or maybe even France, you know. Who knows? Our army is woefully inadequate at this point in the game. It's the problem with the friendly Hitler. One thing it means is I didn't get an offensive marker. You know, I am going to keep one of these air units in reserve in order to provide aid to something like Czechoslovakia. Could do that with the Italians, but they also have a real lack of troops and are kind of worried about the Brits right now. It's hard for the Western Allies to take out their aggressions on the Axis, but if Russia is supplying them with the fuel, flags and such not to increase their commitment, it's not impossible. And so there's a real danger of the Axis getting in trouble because of the communist aggressions. And that's about that. I got to decide on my reserves, but that's it. I'm changing my Soviet builds. I need to get an offensive so I can go into Romania, which means I pulled this out. I forgot and took an airplane out instead. It's gonna, because I'm at mobilization, I got 2 builds, which means an offensive costs me a little bit more. I'm not going to be able to make my attack on Romania without that, and I'm putting that as my reserve because I really do want that extra resource. And it's about the only way that I'm going to get a resource easily. Turkey is another option, but that's only a limited resource, and that's not anywhere near as interesting. Getting Romania will help me build up a nice Russian army and get it all prepared, and then maybe steamroller into Germany. Japanese, probably more interested in an offensive than they are in a flag. We want to get those offensives, and that's another thing, they bought offensives. The Germans, we want to give aid to Czechoslovakia more than anything else. I think so. I think their other chits are less interesting at this point. Okay. And that gets everything in the cup. All our reserves are in play. And Germany's going to aid the Czechs for the first play. We will aid the rightists, of course. Well, Japan can't take the next one. Russia can. Russia's going to invade Romania because bad things could happen, and that could open up. That gives me 2. I am going to actually send the tanks in as well, and the air unit, and I'm going to augment this. This is my key thing, and from here, I have enough of a border that I can then work on building up and then see where we go from there. So, I have air support, so it's 3rd die. Romania is a little more iffy, so they're only going to get 2 dice, but they're a +1, and the armor doesn't take a die away. Okay, that +1's enough to knock the Russians back. Russians are augmented. So actually, we're both at 6. So that hits a Russian. It's easier for me to rebuild an army, so I am going to put then to upgrade one, and the Romanian army is gone. The Russians have succeeded in taking Romania. We're going to flee back into Poland, but we get a cube here. I don't know, Romania is pretty damn important. We'll stay in Romania. Nobody's threatening it, but it could revolt. We'll stay in Romania. We'll probably be getting more troops. That's a cube. That gives us a victory point. And that provokes some people. That provokes the French again. No one else. The aid is not an interest in adjacent areas. The French don't have a flagged place, so they don't actually get provoked. Now the Japanese can take their offensive, which they also want to do. And given our level of commitment, that's a 2-pipper. So we will march into Guangdong with air support. This is kind of a harder situation. The Brits are provoked by this and get a flag. And the Americans are provoked because of the Philippines being adjacent. In fact, they should have been provoked by this one as well, I think. Oh well, we forgot about it. No big deal. Okay. It's good that the Americans are provoked. The Japanese get their 3 dice for having air support. The Chinese, I believe, will be getting an extra die for that aid. In fact, I know they are. And they have essentially a +1 for their military, but the Japanese tie that out with the augmented assault. And the Japanese barely win, which means the Chinese could retreat if they had somewhere to retreat to. They do not, so they are popped along with the aid. And Japan gets another victory space. We'll leave the air power here. This does not fall. Hong Kong stays. And the Japanese and the fascists get a victory point. Well, Italy can't do whatever Italy wants to do, but France could do something. Gosh, I don't know. France could propaganda. Probably not a bad idea. We'll do that. Propaganda. Oops. It's not automatic. And we roll a die. Not good. But we get a cube. And that gives it back to Italy. Italy wants to hold their flag. They're hoping to use it with Germany to generate an alliance and get rid of the Stresa front. Is that important? Not really. Germany is not interested in expanding into the Balkans right now. I mean, they'd love to, but they're not capable of it. So it probably is not that big a deal. The Brits managed to mobilize, pushing them up. That provoked both Italy and Germany, but only Germany had a flag. Putting them there. The druid shit that allowed them to. At this point, Italy's going to trump it, and we gained some additional troops. We're not sure what to do with the British at this point. We built more air power and an air improvement. We can't build navy, which would be a useful thing for the Brits, given that France looks like it might be able to hold its own in this game. I forgot to mention I'm building the Maginot. But Italy is going to come in with Il Duce and throw the Germans in there too and try to make that alliance. We're very worried about the Soviets, but we're not really thrilled about improving the Western Allies either. We don't get anything. That creates an alliance bonus for next time that they both do it. That could make the Brits go. They do not want to go. They didn't really want the mobilization, but nothing else looked really valuable. Yeah, they feel like they have to get it this turn. And, I thought, well, maybe I'll get a cube instead. French are mobilized. Oh, not to the extent. French want to do propaganda, obviously, at +1. Good enough. The cube goes. Brits are the only one with a Trump capability, so they will hold. Germans are going to place their flag again in order to try to make an alliance with the Italians, and we have our first crisis. It is still peace. It doesn't matter that there's these little wars going on. They're just minor. 4-2. Political crisis isolationism. Reduce the United States' effectiveness by 1 until the end of the turn. That kind of sucks. There's some weirdness in the rules about this. This definitely both goes down and gets flipped over for this, but it's possible that like a 1, like France's, could get dropped to a 0. So this is just there to remind me that it isn't actually in its proper location. But not much I can do about that. And that's kind of shitty for the US. We'll draw another. It's more crisis. And don't worry, the turn's not going to end easily from these crises. There's a lot in that cup. Trees. Economic setback. If the next counter drawn is a flag, offensive unit, or upgrade marker, instead of playing it, it gets returned. Okay. Nobody's doing anything exciting. It's a Russian flag, which got canceled by that crisis. A U.S. offensive marker. This is useless. In it goes. Yeah, I should move the U.S. down here. British airplanes. No reason not to place planes. We'll send this down to South Africa. We feel like we have enough to handle whatever Germany's up to right now. Japanese get to upgrade a fleet. And here I am playing every counter out. Oh, we'll put another German Navy here in Silesia. I don't feel like we can challenge the English Navy, although actually we're not that weak with them over here, but we're more worried about the Russians. Let me back off a little bit and draw some chits. Come back. And of course, they immediately have to come back. Japanese home front marker. I rolled the Russians. Instead, they rolled a 1s, 2 1s, and a -1 brings them to 0. 0 is not a good thing. 0 or negative is not a good thing on this test, if I recall correctly. If the final result is 0 or less, it goes down 2 levels. And I thought it was the Russians, because, purple looks a lot like red or something. I don't know. But anyway, that ditches the Japanese government deep into the hole, and that's a problem. With China now cut, the coastline cut off by the Japanese, this English aid marker becomes valueless. I was thinking, geez, can I go take Iceland? I can't unless I'm belligerent. And even then, I think I have to roll a die. Unless the country is enemy controlled, the democratic must immediately... So a democratic power may only attack an ungarrisoned country or capture an unknown base while belligerent. And unless the country is enemy controlled, the democratic power has to make a roll. So I think I just lose an offensive marker. I cannot start a war. I have to do a declaration of war to start a war, which means, you know, I don't know why that offensive chit was in there for aid to China, and that opportunity is not available to me. A Japanese offensive. Well, we probably can't destroy this, especially given that we put our air power back there. So let's start picking on the Chinese in Johar. We'll go in from Manchuria. We'll throw air support in, and I guess we'll augment it as well. Provoked the Russians, actually, so they got a flag there. Would have been a reason to hit this, but that was harder. And I reallocated near the coast. Those are the important regions. These interiors, it's great if I can take them, but they're not that vital. Re-entered into a state of civil war. We've got a lot of civil wars going on right now. No real clue what's going to happen with them all. I gotta remember them. And this one in particular, I'm not sure if I rolled that last time. I'm not sure I should have. The English could start intervening in Spain if they have more chips. The U.S. can't because their offensive markers still suck. We drew a flag after already having a flag on there. This causes them a problem. They're going to try to mobilize with this flag. They're tired of kicking around. No matter what they do, because Italy doesn't have a flag there, they could burn this flag. That would be the only thing that they could do that would do them any good. We're not convinced that an Italian alliance is all that important, so we'll try to mobilize. And we don't succeed. You can see the U.S. has made a couple of attempts too. They burned through their flags, but the isolationist effect means that's not likely to happen. Stability just dropped due to a home front marker. I get to reallocate. Let's send an air unit out to Malaysia. And other than that, we're pretty good in terms of locations. But now we're going to try to stabilize the Brits. It seems like a plan. Because we took a hit on the home front marker, might as well see if we can fix it. And we can. This increased their mobilization, triggering everyone. And built up their ground forces, including a logistics unit that can be really important towards pressing into this USSR. Actually, probably need a second one to really wipe them out, but it feels like that's where we're aiming. We're aiming for defenses in the West, if need be, and trying to knock the Soviets out. We got a couple extra offensive markers. We're not going to eat the Ruhr yet. We'll wait until we're in total war, probably, to use that. Or we'll use it for builds, which gets us more stuff. Total. We probably will use it towards builds. And I don't think anybody's got anything that they really want to do right now. Who has a flag? A lot of people have flags. How are the French feeling? The French have not had their home front come out yet, so they're going to keep their flag available. Got one of those new offensive markers, dropped it into Spain, which they can reach using the regular trace, and the Civil War marker comes out next. Now the Civil War marker, I guess means the Germans get to choose where they're going to go. They'll hit Spain first, what the hell. So that's an extra die for the fascists there. 5-2. That's a major victory. I haven't seen one of those before. Decisive victory. The winning patron gains control of the area, including a regroup. Wow. If I had forces that were positioned here in the Ruhr, I could bring them down there. Neat. That's a quick way to make France unhappy. So yeah, we get a German thing here. The Civil War and the offensive support are both gone. And I don't know, this may trigger France and England. Let's see. Probably does. Intervening triggered them. I don't know if I caught the Russians there. Does winning gains control of an area where it has interest, including by a civil war. Yeah. So another English chit goes in, and that just happened, so it's no big deal. But the English are getting a lot of flags in there, and the French, of course, have their flags all committed already. It's a reason to fire these flags off. Is, you know, if the French had fired one off, they'd get a new one. You know, they only have 2, so it's kind of tough. So that's one civil war. Did I count their victory points? I don't think so. So now the fascists, we look for their +10 marker, which is somewhere. The Germans get a victory, but the fascists as a whole also have a +10. There it is. Okay, so these shouldn't be on the board. These +10s. Just this one. On the other side, they say +20. I'll put them there. That gets us to Czechoslovakia, where we also have a bonus. That's 6-5. That's not as good. That's going to end up being influenced there, but the war's over. I'll roll the Hungarian Civil War just to see if it ends. Okay, that's a 6-5. That's just going to end the war. Nobody intervened in it, so nobody gets anything. Now we go to the Chinese, which is still inactive. There's lots of Japanese troops in there. And that means they're going to expand. The more numerous expands first on a die roll of 2. Well, the more numerous right now is the communists. We'd like to leave room for the nationalists, to tell you the truth, but there's not a lot of space here. So where are we able to expand? Uncontrolled without an army. So the communists are going to try to go into Sichuan, which they succeed in doing. The Russians are probably going to want to support them, maybe. And the other side only rolls 1 die. Since there was a 5, it may have succeeded. Yeah, it does. All right. And now the communist revolt has pretty much expanded to where it can. The only way something different is going to happen is if cubes start disappearing, which can happen, but it has very little to do with the revolt mechanism. They've pretty much spread out to where they are going to be. There's not a lot can be done about it. Oh, whose turn was that? That was the Civil War turn, so anybody can go. take a break. After a bit of dinner and break and such not, I've replaced my dice. Got some nicer sized ones that I can manage a little better. Those guys, I just don't like the large dice, but I also like my heavy duty rounded dice better. GMT used to give better dice. This game, I feel like some serious component choices were made in terms of let's cut some corners there, so the maps are very thin, very, very cheap. Obviously, the full color rule book printed on non-glossy paper is, you know, not the worst choice that could be there. And there's all the player cards and, you know, wooden cubes and all that. So maybe there was a decision they had to cut corners somehow. And these dice I think are more common in GMT nowadays, though. I think they've decided we're not going to put the fancy dice in anymore, except in really special games. I don't think anybody wants to trump in. We are in sudden death, but let's see. The Japanese don't have a trump. The British and the Italians. The British have a trump. They do not need to do their stability. You know what? The Brits would be at the point, but they're already mobilized. They may want to fire something off. What would I want to do? I might want to give a flag to the U.S., of all people, to try to get them mobilized a little bit more quickly. So why don't we do that? We're going to try to encourage the U.S. I don't know if this is... See, the U.S. is at a shitty point right now, but they've got a lot of cubes in increased commitment already. And we do not succeed, but we get a pressure flag. The Russians, how do they feel about their flag? Well, they haven't had their... They could actually do a stability increase. Why not? Actually, it probably should have been done in the other order. They get 3 dice for a stability increase because of their special ability, but they're at -1 for the offensive. So you know what? Take that back. They're going to hold off. There's still a decent amount of stuff in the cup, so it's not likely sudden death is going to be triggered in a bad way. The Brits get to upgrade a tank army. I'm not sure that's the most likely place for it, but whatever. I was going to drop support in Spain, but maybe not. Okay. And I'll just keep pulling chits and I'll come back as needed. Assholes, car alarm in the park behind me. I can't see the place, but it gets, there's a fair amount of noise that comes. There's like a pavilion right through the woods over there. And anyway, it's like, I don't know, maybe 40 yards or something different distance, and people just are there. I don't know why the car is going off, but it has been. Anyway, the French got a mobilization. They drew a flag. Very unlikely. They got their 6th though. Boom. There it is. Yeah, I did this. And they're building up their ground forces. See, France is the interesting thing. If France is still in the game, it's very hard for the Allies, the Western Allies at least, to not go against the fascists. France is going to be very, very rough to access the Soviets in any sense. They have this exposed front. They really kind of have to deal with the Axis. And, you know, Britain and the U.S. could conceivably do something against the Russians. And then also the U.S. over here is very concerned with the Japanese position and not very easily in a position to take care of Russia. So there's almost a natural falling out that the war is going to end up as the Soviets and the Western Allies against the Axis powers in some way. It may continue from there, though. And this game is beginning to look like the Soviets might crush Germany before things get too far in. That provoked both Germany and Italy, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing. And Germany already had a flag, but Italy gets Il Duce, which means we can try for the alliance. I think we're going to do that. Although I would like to get my stability up too. But we're set up for the alliance to start. And we have 2 dice on it. Oh, the Germans got out of the alliance box though. So we don't have a +1. And we don't get the alliance. The Germans do get to go back in it though. So maybe we'll make another attempt later. What about the Russians? They still don't want to play their flag. Something major. I just found the German home front marker sitting in here. So if you haven't seen one of them come up, there's a reason for that. They're doing poor enough. I'm not going to worry too much about it. But honestly, that's something that, you know, is a big mess. The game is completely skewed. If we went through 2.5 turns without the German home front marker coming up, with them being out here. Now they've got a pretty easy time fixing it. But I dropped some tobacco in here, and it turned out I didn't set it up. And unlike most games, yeah, you know, you forget a counter or whatever, that's not a big deal. But here, that's a pretty important counter that didn't make it into the mix. Anyway, the Russians just, the reason I noticed it is I dropped tobacco because I dropped a Russian piece or something. The Russians managed to get a flag, and they cleared their stability problem. And I'm just finding myself constantly coming back to chatter. For whatever reason, but well, the Germans drew an offensive marker, and normally that's a great thing, but I don't necessarily have anything that I'm adjacent to. I'm not really set up to attack anything. That's the problem. So I'd have to spend the offensive to move a unit into place, say to move to Denmark or something. Well, I can move more than one unit. I could move to Spain and put a serious threat over on the French. That would be great if I had more stuff. Never getting the home front meant I never redeployed, and I've got my troops sitting in Berlin. I could attack Czechoslovakia. Not great odds, but not bad. But they're already kind of in my favor. And I've got the best chance of getting them if the Russians try to go in against them. Of course, the Russians can just go in. I'm not positioned to attack Russia. I'm not really in any good position at all. I think I'm going to take a build. Oh. Of course, that gets me out of here again. No, it doesn't. I don't have to roll anything. I get 2 military actions. One of my military actions will be a build. And maybe both of them will. I will build an infantry. And I'll throw it down here. And I'll build an airplane and I'll throw it down here. I'm preparing myself for a war against Spain. Or against France. How wise is this? I don't know. But I feel like I have to take the French out in order to cope with the Russians, and maybe we'll coax them to attack us. All right, the Brits successfully pressured the U.S., getting another chip in there. I don't know why I was considering abandoning that effort and trying to take Denmark diplomatically to slip in. That would have worked as well. My dice were very good, and another British flag. Well, let's go for it this time. It's no go. Gets me no bonus. I could have gone for an alliance with France. That might have been a good move, given what Germany's doing too. It's so hard, you know, especially making the decisions on camera, but just making the decisions. And we get the French home front. Okay, French home front says we roll 1 die at a -1. They get a 5, that's successful. They actually stand. They're allowed to redeploy. That may make sense at this point. We got a lot of pressure all around us, but I don't have more troops. Defend Paris, I guess. More cup. French just drew an offensive marker, and given everything, I am going to try to do a military action. Or not try. I'm going to do builds with it. I get two military actions. That can be 2 builds. I'm going to slap down infantry everywhere. And I was hoping for more Air Force in play, but at this point, I feel like I got to cover everything. We're in there, the 4th crisis came up, but it didn't trigger an end, but now it's triggering one. So let's get... There aren't enough counters. The expensive US counter. The crises, and a German home front, which has to be resolved. Finally! Okay, the German home front is at -1 for mobilization, which means they do finally drop in stability, having actually had the counter in there. Now I get to redeploy. Well, gosh, I would like to have been able to schwack in last turn. There's no question of that. We're going to redeploy into the Ruhr. We're really worried about Russia, but we feel like we've set up for this anti-French position, and we have to go ahead with it. I don't think there's anything else for the end of turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, just making sure I don't have any others that didn't make it in the game. So all of these are going to go in. The crisis marker goes in. We slip into 39 to 40. The French get their fortress, which, given the threat, is probably going to end up in Paris at this point, just because we're surrounded now in an ugly sort of way, and we want to hold on to the capital because that's the thing that's likely to send us into a tailspin. We got some more counters here. They've got to be deployed. Note that counters that you put in reserve don't count against, what was in the cup. So by reserving things, you're making the turn more likely to end quickly, potentially. We fix the Americans here. And I think there's some other things we got to fix. French commitment, they're in mobilization. Germans are in mobilization. Brits have fixed theirs. And it feels like the war's about ready to start, right on time. But maybe a little differently. We have a very, very hostile-looking Soviet Union poised to smack into Germany there. And we also have Spanish, Germans in Spain ready to march across the border, and that could be a problem too. All right, let us, I think, load this one up, even though it's a little short. It's not so, there's no way I'm going to get two turns on this video. So maybe I shouldn't have tried to back away quite the way I did. I'll check the victory points and such too.